Welcome back to the Sonic Days podcast. We're delighted to bring you a new season of talks recorded live at Sonic Days 2024. We'll cover brand new sessions spanning various topics and difficulties, so there's something for everyone, whether you're a beginner or a professional. Don't forget to save the date for Sonic Days 2025, the 19th and the 20th of November. In this episode, we're taking a closer look at the creative journey behind the debut self-titled album from Thingpower, which is a duo consisting of Peter Albrechtsen and Troels Abrahamsen. We're also joined by Grønbæk, who did the Atmos mix for the record.
Well, we were supposed to be three, but Troels Abrahamsen, who is my partner in Thingpower, is in crazy traffic. He's been driving from Copenhagen this morning, and apparently because the roads are slippery, so he'll be here in like 15-20 minutes. I'll just start talking a lot of shit about him, and then he'll come in and we'll take it from there. It's nice to see you. Welcome. It's like the very first session here at Sonic Days. This project is really special because for me, this is actually I've been part of a lot of movies during the years, but this is actually the first album that I've been part of. And the plan is today to play you a handful of tracks from the album. So we'll play a track and then talk a bit, and then play a few more tracks. And apart from me and Troels, we invited Grønbæk, who did the Atmos mix of the album. And we'll talk much more about that process as well. And we'll be listening to the Atmos mixes of the album. And I wanted to kind of start out just playing you the first song on the album. Then afterwards, we'll kind of dig into the process of making this crazy music.
Little did we think of little things that roll right off the tongue. Little did we notice little things that happen all at once. Everything is on at the same time. Come up with a story, something to rehearse, something to say, picked out from a mass of little things that happen a prism pointed up directly at the sun. What are we to make of all the things that happen all at once? Everything is all at the same time. 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 Everything is all at the same time.
A nice quiet way of starting the morning. So the story about making this album was that Troels has been a singer and a songwriter for many years in different bands, but had a lot of interest in film music, soundtracks. So we met because on one of the first feature films I did many years ago, he had a song in there like with one of his bands, and we, like, when the song was playing, I was like, I think to make this really powerful, we need some train sounds in there. So I put a train sounds inside of his songs. And I think like that kind of started this conversation between the two of us where we were like, okay, so how is it with sound and music? And he loved the idea of using sound as part of music. And then we did a couple of movies where he did the score and I did the sound design, and we had a really close collaboration. Then 8 years ago, I got asked by the Architecture Festival in Copenhagen to present some movies, but also do like a sound event. And I reached out to Troels and said, Troels, how about that we do something together for this thing? And that at that point, he had just released a solo album where Exec, it was called, where it was just him and a piano. And then he had done like 10 songs in that very kind of basic setup in a way. So then we met in my studio and he brought his songs along, and then I started kind of doing some sound design, soundscapes around his piano songs. And I really vividly remember being there for like, I think after like a couple of hours, he was like, Peter, try and just mute the piano and then I can just sing along with the sound effects. And it just worked really well. We did this concert, this event together, where we then used his songs as a kind of blueprint for all these sonic remixes in a way. And we both really enjoyed that creative process. So we agreed that, okay, we should start doing some compositions together, where that was kind of the idea, that sound design and musical instruments and musical elements kind of really melted together, and that you couldn't really no longer tell so what was an actual musical instrument in a way and what was a sound effect. And I mean, that's 8 years ago, so we've been working on this for 8 years, and of course that's because we're both busy doing lots of different things. Troels has all his music things happening. I've been doing quite a lot of movies. So it's been a process where we kind of met now and then, usually in my studio. Usually Troels had kind of maybe a little kind of musical motif or something that he then brought along, maybe sometimes just a beat, and then we just started going from there, kind of in a way jamming in the studio, just like, okay, so that sound, it goes really well together with these sounds of these insects. Okay, let's try and do that. And Troels has this amazing ability. Well, I said that I was going to talk shit about him. Now I'm going to talk about the amazing things about Troels, is that he has this ability of just like singing on top of something where you think, okay, this is just like abstract sound weirdness, and he's just singing on top of it like it was someone playing an acoustic guitar next to a campfire. That is this thing where we, from the beginning, kind of felt that from the very first sketches we did, like, let's kind of have that voice be kind of the center of the whole thing that kind of gives you that kind of calmness inside of what can sometimes be like a quite crazy, lots of elements, lots of manipulation of sounds and instruments, but really have that voice be the hand that reaches out to you and kind of brings you through this sonic madness. But yeah, then we met like maybe sometimes once a month, sometimes like every second month, and had these sessions. And then like half a year ago, we felt that we had so much material that we were like, okay, let's do an album. So we are both of that generation where like an album is still something special. I know that people say that nowadays, like no one listens to albums, but for us, it's still like we're doing an album. So we went to a recording studio in Copenhagen, and then we invited a couple of musicians to join us there. We had a singer, Else Torp, who was part of the choir, classical choir group and kind of avant-garde choir group, Theatre Voices, she's the one singing on Johan Johansson's Arrival soundtrack, which for both me and Troels have been one of the big references, like soundtrack-wise, this thing of like playing around with sonic textures and then also having melodic elements in there. So Else's vocal is in several of these songs, but you might not be able to really notice that it's Ilse, but there's a couple of places where you really hear her. And then we invited a cello player. We had done some string samples, but we wanted to kind of bring in a cello player who were actually like able to do some of these things that we had played around with during our kind of jam process. And she also did a bunch of textures, and I'll talk about that in some of the other tracks we'll hear. We also did some extra recordings of, I've just being in a classic kind of music studio was so much fun. I like all these different instruments, and you can kind of play different things. And I'm when I was a kid, for 10 years actually, I played classical piano, and it doesn't mean that I'm very good at it, but I can do kind of the basics. Troels is still way better than me, but like we had all these things where like just playing a few things on different instruments, some percussion. So we did a lot of like, we were in the recording studio for 5 days and just like recorded a bunch of stuff and did some kind of first rough mixes, and that kind of made the album come together in a way. And a couple of the songs were really rough sketches, but we kind of built them into more like songs in a way. So that was a really wonderful process as well. And then I'm friends with Nathan Moody, who's a music producer, sound designer, a mastering engineer. And after kind of doing our parts in the mixes, we send it to Nathan. I've known Nathan for several years. We've done a few projects together, and Nathan has this wonderful ability to kind of like also look at sounds like if they were music and music as sound in a way. So he did a really great job on the mastering. It was really difficult to get this music to sound right. And because it's so complex, there's so many details. So what we did was we mastered the whole album in stereo stems so that we could keep on tweaking on all the details along the way. And Nathan just did a really great job on that. So then from that, we then had the stereo master it was released last Friday on vinyl and also on all the streaming services. From the very beginning, Troels and I had been talking about working in immersive formats because we both love cinema and we both done all this movie work. So that was kind of the next step. We got the stereo stems from Nathan, the mastered stereo stems, and that was then brought to Frank, who did the Atmos mix from there. Yeah, so that's kind of the story of the process simply of doing this. It's been a long journey. I wanted to play you one more song before kind of digging into all the Atmos stuff, and Troels hopefully will join us very soon. I also just wanted to say that if you have some questions, then please feel free to ask. For me, the whole thing also with this has also been, one thing is to kind of do all these things of making sounds and music come together. There's a lot of things where we had a musical element where I liked a part of the texture, and then I started building a sound effect, shaping it so that it fit with the musical instrument. And then we often removed a musical instrument and then just had all these textures playing around. And then there's of course the whole thing with Troels' vocals, which when Troels comes, we should definitely dig into that, because it's one thing is that I really like his performance and the calmness of his voice, but then there's of course all these different layers. I feel that when doing movies, you're so focused on there's a lot of focus on having the dialogue feel right and the acoustical spaces feel right when you watch a movie. Of course you can do all kinds of abstract crazy things in a movie, but when you see someone in a room, it has to kind of sound like that person is in that room when they talk. So for me, for this, I just loved the idea that we kind of played around with just smashed up all acoustical kind of logic, and often having a lot of treatments that of sounds and especially of Troels' voice that just is so abstract, and quite often having different reverbs that changes around the space and and that his vocal is also changing throughout a song. So that's something also to listen for, that we're really trying to play around with. In the song you just heard, maybe you notice that kind of halfway through the song, suddenly his voice kind of disappears and then it comes back again, and things like that, where you think that you wouldn't really be allowed to do in a film, and also actually on an album. It's you don't really hear a pop song where suddenly the voice disappears and comes back again. But all these kind of things where trying to not as a reaction really to what I've been working on through all these years, but more a sense of exploring what we could do. And that's really been kind of the headline for this project, really okay, let's see what we can do, and there's no limit to really what is allowed here. But then at some point, of course, also finding a way of kind of making it into compositions that feel like it's kind of compositions. We wanted to make this feel like you are invited into the music, even though it's abstract and in a way very avant-garde. It's also hopefully in a way, I don't know, soothing or embracing or taking you into it, especially because of Troels' voice. But let's hear the next track. It's the track called Woven on Blue, and it's I usually call it our ballad. So let's see how that goes.
Trails over trails, woven on blue, a code for us all to die in. Invisible fingers pulling the threads, tiny destructive like habits. Trails over trails, woven on blue, a code for us all to die in. Forced to the ground, clipped and confused, equal horizons for equals. White over blue, blue over black. The veil has been cast once again. It was but a dream, a moment's respite. The blue is enmeshed once again. The veil has been cast once again. White over blue, blue over black. The veil has been cast once again.
Troels?
Yeah. Hi. Sorry I'm late. Apparently winter is a surprise for everyone in Denmark, including people in cars.
I was thinking that I remember like you talking about like just this process of working in a different way with like just the structure of composing. Like
Yeah.
That what you're used to, and maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So I think for me, coming from more of a music side of things than Peter, maybe, what was most interesting, I think, have been very sort of rapid fire sessions where we met in your studio, and I usually brought like a very rough draft of something, like small melody parts and a loop or a little harmonic thing, and then we threw it into your system. Unlike mine is usually obviously grid based, and Peter works timeline based. So he had no respect for bars or loops or anything, and so it gives it this very fluid and dissolving and disintegrating feeling. That it's like everything falls apart all the time during music, and then I think my role in our creative process would be, okay, now we need to bring the loop back in, because otherwise it'll get too disintegrated. But I think it made it a little easier for me once we got in. Obviously, I'm very into sound design, so it's not like I don't understand what's going on in a timeline-based thing I do. I've always also composed for films, so I kind of know the process of working in that way. But I think moving from the door and into more of a mixing session with you, Frank, I think it was easier to get into the feeling of pulling soundscapes apart and then, assembling them again in this new structure. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's what I have to say about disintegration in our process.
For me, it also goes to say that there's these things that, like from both of our sides, that we have all these kind of creative things that we like, for example, but that we're used to doing. Like I just talked before about, like, I'm used to doing in a film that, okay, so you have an acoustical space, you have to kind of fill out that acoustical space with something that feels like you're making the acoustical space natural.
Yeah.
For me, this is opposite of that. It's kind of like we're treating acoustical space in a very abstract way.
Yeah.
And I think the same goes for your process of like being used to a grid, and you kind of dissolve all that. But we kind of been able to meet in the middle of bringing our creative ideas together and kind of seeing, okay, so what happens if someone tries this and someone tries that? Mm-hmm. And I feel that generally a thing that's been characteristic of this process is the openness.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of like, okay, so why don't we try this or why don't we try that? And then because of the years that have gone by, it's also like, I feel that now when we were getting things together towards the end, it was also this feeling of like, I feel often in movies when like you have to do the sound for a movie in like a limited time, and you have a deadline, and you kind of sometimes you kind of lose the overview of, okay, so what is it we're doing? And I felt that in this process, because it's been going on for so long, that I'm not exactly sure if I know what we've been doing, but it feels, at least when we were in the finishing process, that we were looking at something that we had been like looking at for a long time, and made it just feel like had a little more reflection in a way. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking maybe it's time to bring in Frank and talk a little bit about the process of kind of taking these crazy sounds and building them up around you. But it's also like, do you have some questions out there? Then
yeah. Oh, thanks. I really enjoyed the piece. This process of making stems from the stereo sessions, could you elaborate a bit more on what you meant? Like, what were those stems?
So what we tried to do with the stems was, like, usually in a piece of music you would have stereo stems for each instrument and things like that. But on this, you couldn't really do it like that. There were, of course, some instrument elements, but also just a lot of things that were like vocal effects 1, vocal effects 2, vocal effects 3, vocal effects 4. And it's kind of like, okay, so how do you describe that Troels' voice turns into a robot and is panning weirdly around? We split out things quite a lot to kind of make sure that we were able to get the clarity from all the elements, so that I'm not a music person, but I think that quite often you kind of do the mastering of something from, like, you have a stereo mix and then you do, or...
Yeah, maybe I can add to it that we had quite a lot of Skype or Zoom or whatever calls with Nathan Moody, who did the stereo master and the stems mastering. And he was like, he usually does music, and we quickly realized that we couldn't segment things into the regular food groups, as he called them. So not even like on an instrument basis, like you can have the drums and the bass, guitar, and so on. But here we had to like figure out what was sort of the spectral journey throughout the stem, because one part can start being very trebly or in the higher frequency area, and then midways it will shift into deep bass or something like that, and that sort of challenges you to, as I would imagine, Nathan was challenged in trying to figure out where are the groups and what are the groups. And I think to pull it back into the stereo mix and how we translate that into multi-channel, I think doing the stereo, like working in stereo, we always thought about it as multi-channel. Obviously it is multi-channel because there are two, but it would have more multi-channel. So the process of mastering the stems was figuring out, essentially not thinking in frequencies kind of way, but thinking in a multi-channel kind of way instead. Does that make sense? So figuring out the stems was about where do we want to place them, instead of in the multi-channel dome, and not where do we want to place them in the spectrum of things.
So then you could allow for something with bass content and treble content to be in the same stem.
Yes.
Okay.
But obviously that put a toll on Nathan, because he couldn't like just tweak his machines to one setting for one stem, because midways it would shift and then he had to work on them again. So it was a bit of a daunting process for him, I think, but he managed to do okay, I think.
He did really, really well. Yeah, but there's a lot of shape shifting of the sounds during the also like.
Was that done?
Yeah.
Did you do a lot of that while you guys were composing, though? Were you committing to those ideas?
Yes.
Right, like you had to, right?
Exactly.
But just be.
Yeah.
So it goes. So did you find over the course of the 8 years that new plugin came out, or oh, I like this, but I like what we did back then. Just like, no, we're gonna stick with that and just carry that. Forward,
yeah. I mean, there was things that we stick to, but there was also things where we kept developing things. Like it was really like an ongoing process. And I remember like when I got Envy, that was a big thing for this project, because like suddenly you could have like an instrument that then was turned into a sound and like things like that.
Right.
So that's definitely been like during those 8 years, okay, suddenly there's this plugin, okay. And I remember like sometimes Troels coming to my studio and I was like, Troels, you have to see this. Just, Envy, like, so we put in an instrument and then it turns into a sound, stuff like that. Yeah. So there's been that kind of exploration along the way, yeah.
But I think in contrast to how I work, where all of my sessions from 15 years ago, they're all like, nothing is rendered, everything is still plugins. Yeah. Sure. So, but Peter renders all the time.
Right.
And I don't know if that's a Pro Tools thing, but apparently you render all the time.
Yeah, because I think it's a combination, right? And then because then you can render it, but then you probably resample it, and then it turns into something else, and then resample it again versus leaving it live.
But I do a lot of my processing I always do in Pro Tools, so it's on another. I mean, I usually don't have a lot of plugins kind of playing live. I do a lot of the processing on the sounds, and then I keep them, print them. And that was actually really good for this project, because it's kind of like when you come back to a session that you did 4 years ago, and like, okay, maybe there would be things that maybe wouldn't play anymore and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. Right. So it was crazy also in that sense.
So I guess the short answer is yes, we committed very frequently to our choices and then forgot them for 4 years and then wondered why did we commit to that.
There's a question down there.
I mean, when listening to this, in particular on headphones, it's really impressive. So congratulations with the release. But I was curious. It was very interesting to see you playing this and look, watching where the objects are. Because when this is like distributed on the streaming platforms, it's always compressed spatially down to, I think, like a maximum of 15 objects at any one time, and that seems to be something that you considered very carefully in a mix.
Maybe this is a good day.
Yeah. So the streaming services, they provide 16 channels, but that's different from how many objects, because the objects are still there. They're just only played out through 16 channels instead of how many.
So I mean, they would be merging. I mean, if there are many objects in many places, they will start merging them into so that there's only, in the encoded part, there's only 15 objects at any one time. But it seems like a lot of your objects were located in the same places as the speakers in the bed, for instance.
Yeah, but so let's start there instead. So when Peter and Troels approached me with this project, they described it. We're doing this sound design music kind of thing. Could you have a listen? Would you like to do something like that in Atmos? We've been talking about we want to do it in Atmos for so long, and it would really be nice to have someone who's been doing a lot of Atmos music mixing, because Peter has done really a lot of Atmos mixing, but for movies and series and films and stuff like that. When I heard it, it immediately, of course, triggered me completely with all these sounds and just thought, yeah, of course. I mean, this is heaven. I can throw things around. I can do all the things that's fun to do. And then Peter also was like, yeah, and we wanted to play in home entertainment, and we'll also do it in cinemas. Okay, then there's a thing about how to set up your Atmos session in a way where you can actually start thinking cinematic at the same time as this home entertainment system that we were listening to here, and what you stream as well. So I had to build a session that could do both, and that means that I have done an object bed, which is what you see when you see all the objects that's placed in a speaker way, and then there's of course object that moves, but the bed is also used. So it's actually all the elements of both worlds that's combined. And that really has been super interesting when Peter said, yeah, you'll get 16 stems or something like that per song. And I'm like, usually when I do a music piece, I'll get some stems. And then I always ask for the pre-mix stems as well. So whatever has been delivered to the mixing engineer, I'll have that as well. And then I built like two sides, one with mix stems and one pre-mix stems. And then when you have the drum kit and you would like, maybe it would be nice to have the cymbals upstairs or widen the toms a little or whatever. Okay, then you open up the drum kit, but then you know how it's supposed to sound in stereo, and then you can open up the drum kit and do the things, so compress, EQ, whatever, to make it fit like the other one. Then you don't need to sit in a complete mix of all the instruments. And is that 800 hertz that's in the tom, or then you get it completely isolated and you can hear what's done, also compressing wise and all these things. So that's basically how I usually work. But in this matter, Peter said, no, you can't have that. That's simply too complex. Forget it. That's not going to happen. Okay. So I got these stems, and I had to again figure out, because they literally changed throughout the song. So I don't know how many times I had to cut them up and move them to different tracks, because some was supposed to be then like bed element in the first part, and then in the second part or in the middle, just it was something, and then back to something else. So I really have been cutting this up a lot to do this, and also I must also say that when they approached me, I was also a little, actually I was a little afraid to overdo it, because it really screams on getting big and you want to do all kinds of things. So I was actually a little afraid that I took it too far. And then when they heard it the first time, they were like, all the feedback I got was like, more immersive. Could this turn around as well? When this turns around, can it then? So it seemed that we were completely on the same page. So, and I had just been sitting there holding myself back a little. But now it's happened to be a thing where my complete thought about it when I approached it was that there's this anchor constantly in this music where the vocal is simply the anchor of the whole thing. It kind of ties the whole album together, and everything is kind of surrounding of this. So for me it was just so super important that that's a solid, steady thing that needs to be in the front constantly. And then, of course, there is a lot of vocal effects and stuff like that, and those can fly around. I don't care. But as soon as Troels has these dry, calm, and really storytelling voices, they simply need to be as center as possible. So that's been my philosophy, and then building around that. So, and I think one can really get away with a lot when these things are sitting quite solid in the center. Yeah, but let's hear one more song.
I just wanted to just talk
The whole thing, the whole final one?
Yeah. Wow. We go all the way. Oh, but just that song is just digging into the sounds a little bit. This was a song where our cello player, Maria, we asked her, okay, so what kind of weird sounds can you do on the cello? Yeah. And she came up with a few of those. One of those were like doing a sound where it sounds like breathing. Mm. And when I heard that sound, I was like, okay, this is something special. And then we recorded that, and then we suddenly, the song was starting in a different way before, but now that's the first sounds you hear. So suddenly structuring a song around a sound that comes up from a live instrument that is really building on a song that started 4 years earlier. Mm. And then she were able to do some kind of weird thing with the cello which made it sound like birds.
Yeah, I asked her to do because there were some fragments of bird sounds in the things that we have made, and I asked her to do, can you do like a bird sound? And apparently there's this very specific articulation called the seagull, which is just and it sounds like a seagull. And apparently it's something all cellists know about. I didn't know about it, but if you ever need sounds like a cellist to sound like a bird, just ask them to do the seagull.
So that became a big part of in the ending, and then suddenly building bird sounds around that. And then there's in the middle there's a segment with Else where you can really hear her voice.
Yeah.
And try and notice how Frank did a wonderful job on like building that into the whole Atmos soundscape.
Every second is a friend. That dies and disappears. With the minutes and the hours. And those monumental years. Every second is a friend that dies and disappears. With the minutes and the hours. And those monumental years. Every second makes a promise to the hang suspended. All movement stop for sure. Treasure every friend that tries to lock their hands with yours.
Well, we are kind of there time-wise, but maybe there's one last question or something that's coming up.
I have a question actually about headphones. So obviously now you're dealing in the music part of the Dolby Atmos cosmos suddenly, where headphones is a big consideration because so much music is consumed on headphones, and I guess you did so much Dolby Atmos for cinema, where headphones is never really a big topic. So was this a new thing for you? If yes, how was it? How did you deal with it in general? And specific on this album, how was the translation? Or did you just say, forget about it and we don't check headphones? Or how did
we definitely. I can say something about that, because actually what was very enlightening by visiting Frank was that he had a headphone setup so we could shift between, and he was very adamant about we had to always check the stereo render, because we had to make sure that things, and it was also one of the reasons you gave to why you hadn't thrown all the objects around and had done all the things, was that if it doesn't render very well to the stereo binaural sound, because it gets too, flimsy. And that was new to me. And I remember I asked you, Frank, if it was possible, because obviously from this process I've been wanting to do everything now in Dolby Atmos, because I think it's so much fun. But I would very much like it to be one process, instead of having like a stereo process and then a Dolby Atmos process and then whatever else formats there are. It would be very nice to sort of go Dolby first and then have the Atmos render for the big setups first, and then mix it in a way that so you were able to render it basically down to a mono mix in the end. That would be my ideal process. I don't know if that's something that's going to happen very soon. I don't think so, but it would be very nice if that's.
It happens.
It happens.
That talk about in 1 hour.
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
And just to elaborate a little further, it's really something that, as you say, that I was super keen on, because the thing is that it's so important. Maybe somewhat 95% is actually listening to this in binaural. So of course to just not treat it at all would not make sense. So one definitely needs to make sure that it translates. So it's necessary.
And that percentage is because it's by default in all the.
So it's because it's in these and all kinds of the little. So these guys, you can either play them in just one of them, or in two of them, or in five of them, or whatever. So it's important that it translates to stereo and to binaural and to 5.1 and more immersive setups. So it is necessary to check all these things, especially when you have such a thing like this, where you literally want a lot of immersive stuff going on, and to check how it actually translates.
I mean, for me, this was exactly why we wanted Frank on board, because, I mean, I've never been part of that process. I mean, for me, sitting on a mix stage, like, I would never wear a set of headphones or think like about, I mean, for me, it's just like, okay, I'm in the cinema, I'm doing this, that's how I like this. I usually make the other mixer do the deliverables, because I get so like depressed doing all the deliverables and thinking about, okay, so we just have to scale down the mix to all these things and all these kind of other less exciting mixes, But for me, it was really interesting to make this process, because then I feel that what we did also with you, Frank, was that then you find out, okay, so if this is how it works in binaural, then maybe we can do a pan like this, or we can do thing. I mean, then you kind of you become creative on that foundation of the knowledge that, I mean, the immense knowledge that Frank had about how to make these things translate meant that we could be creative inside of that box, instead of using it as a limitation, then say, okay, so this is how we do this, because then it works really well. And that's been kind of the thing all the way for this project. It's kind of like we could see something as a limitation, but we actually see it as an inspiration. And it's been, in that sense, a great project. Thank you so much.
Thank you.